Hey guys, I'm going to do another video here from the Baburin book, Winning Pawn Structures. This time we're going to look at a classic game from Botvinnik. And the key features that we're going to look at in this game is, again, continuing on with our discussion of the attack on either the f7 or the f2 square. In the previous videos that I've done, the attack on the f2 square or f7 has been generated based on either removing the pawn from either e3 or e6, or there just being not one present to begin with. But in this game, we're going to check out a typical tactical motif that white has, demonstrating that the f7 square isn't always so safe, even if it has a pawn on e6 to guard it. Alright, so let's jump into the game. We'll go through the opening relatively quickly. It was a Queen's Gambit decline. And here Botvinnik chooses his pet line. Instead of bishop d3, rook c1 is usually played. And the idea is that if black chooses to capture, we'd like to take all in one go. But Botvinnik routinely tried to obtain an IQP position. And so by playing bishop d3, he sort of encourages white to win a encourages black to win a tempo, but in return, he's probably going to get the structure that he wants here. So black goes ahead and goes for it, so we take, and then we play c5 just immediately. So castles, and he captures, defining the pawn structure quite early. Baburin comments that a6 here was probably more accurate. The idea is that after a6, we're threatening b5, which could be annoying. So this sort of encourages white to play a4. And after a4, then capturing on d4 weakens the b4 square, which may be useful for black in several lines. Often a knight will find its way here to control the d3 and c2 squares, or sometimes it can just use that square as a route to get to d5. A bishop might end up there and being active and causing some issues. But instead, we get this move, just clarifying immediately. So of course we take back, and then knight b6 drops the bishop back to b3, and knight b5, just immediately trying to blockade that square. It's probably not strictly necessary to blockade here yet. It might have been better to just develop the bishop first instead of rushing to do this. So knight e5. Notice there's no knight on c6, which means this e5 square is going to be quite important. And we already start to have the beginnings of the tactical sequence that we're going to look at in this game. It involves a knight on e5, which touches this f7 square, and then having the bishop lined up behind that. And then in in a couple moves, we're gonna see the queen's gonna line up on e2, which is gonna join in on the attack on this e6 and f7 squares. Already sort of related to the last video, we noticed that we already have a couple of the key factors to execute the f4, f5 plan. Notice we have the knight on e5, and our rook is still on f1. So that idea might be present in this position, although white goes for a different type of plan here. So the knight drops back. Black is trying to, again, seek some solace and some peace trades. It's a pretty common motif here. Black generally happy to exchange pieces. So of course we're going to take, and then after knight takes, he plays queen e2. Baburin has another option for white here. He mentions knight e4. And the idea is that we're going to hit on these dark squares, which are now a little bit weaker since there's no dark squared bishop to protect them. Again, white's not worried about something like this. After just the pawn takes, we can maybe trade queens, it doesn't much matter. But notice that he no longer has this isolated pawn. In fact, he has a pretty strong pawn that is going to give him a nice solid outpost on the d6 square, which may be useful at some point later. So not worried about that. And if black tries to come back to f6, well, he just can't, because we're just going to take it, and then his pawn structure is going to be quite problematic. We would probably see queen come out to g4 with an immediate check, and there's just going to be some real problems. But instead he goes for this queen e2. Oops, sorry, not knight e4. We said queen e2. And then knight f6. And then he plays rook fd1. It's always very difficult to know which squares you should put your rook on, because there are several good choices. You have the c file, the d file, and the e file. White would really like it if he had 3 rooks and he could just put a rook on all 3 of those. But alas, he has to make a choice. Botvinnik chooses to go to the d file and then put the other rook on the c file. However, again, keeping with our idea of allowing this f4, f5 plan, he could have chose to play rook ad1, which temporarily is going to leave this rook on the f1 square. And if we see that if black followed up with like b6, if that bishop leaves this this diagonal, we can see that we've already got all of the key features we talked about in the last 2 videos that would perhaps make this this pawn push successful. But instead he goes for this setup, plays b6, rook ac1, and just brings the bishop up to try to defend against the d5 square. An interesting move here, f3. Probably not the first move that comes to mind for most of us, but it has a key point. The idea is that he would like at some point to be able to play this knight to e4, which is going to help him attack on the king side and get control of the d6 square. But at the same time, it also limits the scope of this bishop. Sometimes if black is able to build a battery with the queen on c6, clearly not probably a good idea right now, but it may happen later. Or if these knights move, if the queen comes out to g5, there's going to be some tension here. So playing f3 just kind of closes that down a little bit. And then rook ac8. This is actually the losing move in the game. It's quite careless. Because it exposes him to the attack that we're going to see on the immediate move. So I've already sort of hinted at what the idea might be, but take a moment and see if you can figure out where Botvinnik's play was from here. Okay, I hope you took a chance to pause your videos and take a look. I'm going to go ahead and move on. The move was knight takes f7. Which, at the very absolute least, is going to win going to win white 2 minors and for a rook and 2 pawns, which in this position is going to be quite good for him because one of those pawns is a pass pawn, and there are plenty of open files for his rooks. Which, when you look at the balance between looking at 2 minors versus a rook, one of the key factors is going to be, do the rooks on the opposing side have open files? And they do here. They're going to help support this d pawn, and I think that would just be a pretty healthy material advantage. So rook takes, and then queen takes, which is an instructive move. I think a lot of us would be tempted just to play with the bishop and just try to win this exchange immediately. But by taking with the queen, he's threatening to win this rook outright and not have to give up a minor for it. And he's going to be able to put more general pressure on the position and try to get more than just that minimal material advantage that we're talking about just a minute ago. So queen f8, essentially forced, and then knight e4, making use of that earlier f3 move. So I don't see that black's going to want to play knight takes knight, because then that's just going to allow a connected set of pass pawns. So that's probably definitely not going to happen. And so he's going to be able to utilize this knight on the d6 square to add even more pressure against this f7. If knight d6 is allowed, again, he's going to win this rook outright. So we get rook takes rook, rook takes, and then he plays knight to d5, trying to block down this file some. But it looks like that if white's not careful, this pin may slip out. He may be able to play g6, bring the king out. For that reason, the immediate knight d6 is just going to guarantee that he's going to get that material advantage. notice that even though this diagonal is really cluttered right now, this bishop lined up against the king is going to play a key role. That's going to help him win more than just that minimal amount of material we were talking about before. So after bishop a8, because of course the bishop was hanging, we drop back, and then rook e1. Okay, just adding pressure to this knight, because this knight, while not technically pinned right now, if we envision an exchange here, is gonna open up this pin. Okay, so g6. There's really not much else that black could really try. He can't move either knight. If he moves this knight, then we'll immediately just take this one, because that's going to allow this pin. If this knight were to move, then bishop takes knight, bishop takes, and queen takes, and we've won a piece that way too. So neither knight can move. The queen obviously can't move anywhere. The rook is pinned. This one, so I guess technically he could play this bishop out to c6. But that's really not going to change anything. So he's reduced to pawn moves, and at least he's going to try to break that pin, but it's not going to matter. Knight takes f7, queen takes f7, and then queen e6, utilizing this pin. So if queen takes queen, then rook takes, and that rook is going to be safe. He's up a full exchange. Probably going to grab this pawn here, because he is threatening to play rook e8 check and pick up the bishop, which means the bishop has to move. So it's just all in all pretty terrible position. He's down in exchange. He's down 2 pawns, and excuse me, and he's just gonna just outright lost. So black resigned here. Quite an instructive and fairly typical tactical motif. Let's go back and look at the key position again that led up to that. So I guess I could have just skipped to it. Sorry about this. Okay, so this is kind of the key position here. We notice that we have developed both our rooks. We have this bishop aiming down against the king, and excuse me, we have the knight on e5, which hits f7, and then the queen backing up to support. After bishop b7, this further encourages this idea, because the bishop is no longer guarding the square. It's a little bit of a tough decision for black to make, to decide if he wants to use his bishop to control d5 or use it to protect e6. It's a pretty delicate balance that black doesn't really manage too well in this game. And then so after f3, bringing the rook in, black had the chance to he could have played one of the knights here to d5, which would have blocked this tactic, but instead he allows it, and we get this really thematic sacrifice with a pretty quick tactical finish here. So just flipping through it real quickly one more time and get back to the finished position, and yeah, pretty fantastic and really instructive game from Botvinnik, showing that just because there's a pawn on e6 does not at all mean that e6 and f7 are safe. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this game and found it as instructive as I did. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.